By the summer of 1940, Britain faced a war unlike any in its history. The German Wehrmacht had swept through continental Europe with astonishing speed. France fell in June, and the British Expeditionary Force had been evacuated from Dunkirk, leaving the nation both triumphant and battered. London, Birmingham, Coventry, these cities now faced the specter of sustained aerial bombardment. The Luftwaffe, under the direction of Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, sought to break Britain's will before the Wehrmacht could launch an invasion. In the capital, the civilian population braced for an onslaught that was as invisible as it was relentless. Intelligence reports at the War Office, later archived at the National Archives, Kew, anticipated night raids intended to destroy industrial centers, transport hubs, and morale alike. The first major assault came on 7 September 1940. The date soon seared into the public consciousness as the beginning of the London Blitz. Fires erupted along the Thames. Factories crumbled under high explosive bombs, and the city's skyline became a patchwork of smoke and rubble. Every street, every terrace, every narrow alleyway bore the scars of war. Citizens learned to recognize the distinctive drone of Heinkel and Dornier bombers, and the wail of air raid sirens became a constant companion. The government, anticipating mass casualties, had already organized civil defense measures. Air raid precaution, ARP, wardens patrolled streets to enforce blackout regulations, signal fires indicated shelter locations, and Anderson shelters, small corrugated steel huts, were distributed to those who could not evacuate. Hospitals, overwhelmed yet remarkably resilient, operated around the clock. Nurses, often women in their 20s, moved through rubble-strewn wards, tending to the wounded with quiet determination. Amid this chaos, the British public demonstrated a stoicism that would come to define the era. Reports in the BBC war correspondent dispatches described scenes of civilians carrying on daily routines, despite shattered streets, intermittent electricity, and rationing that had tightened the nation's domestic life. Children were especially vulnerable. Many lived in flats above shops or along bomb-prone thoroughfares. Parents faced the constant dilemma of keeping them at home, shielding them in shelters, or sending them to the countryside under government evacuation schemes. The Luftwaffe's strategy evolved rapidly. Initial attacks targeted docks and industrial sites along the Thames, yet as British radar technology and night fighter operations improved, German bombers increasingly struck residential areas. The Home Office, alongside the Ministry of Health and the newly formed Ministry of Information, coordinated warnings and public guidance. Newspapers published detailed instructions: avoid main streets during raids, keep children under close supervision, and listen for warden signals indicating safe passages. Railways became critical arteries of survival. Reports from the London Transport Museum archives highlight the extraordinary strain on trains ferrying children out of the city. Stations were frequently damaged. Blackout restrictions obscured signage, and platforms filled with anxious parents and bewildered children. Yet the system, tested to its limits, became a lifeline. Mothers and fathers learned to navigate bombed streets, relying on maps issued by local councils and guidance from ARP wardens to reach trains bound for rural towns, villages, and farms. Beyond London, the British government monitored civilian morale and resilience through the Ministry of Home Security. Detailed reports, later preserved in the Churchill Papers, recorded the psychological impact of sustained bombardment, anxiety, sleeplessness, yet also acts of calm heroism. Citizens dug sandbag trenches around houses, repaired damaged homes, and volunteered in fire-watching patrols. Every small act contributed to the broader war effort. In this landscape, a mother deciding to move her children from immediate danger faced logistical and emotional challenges that mirrored the larger struggle of Britain itself. Streets were dangerous, public transport uncertain, and night raids unpredictable. Yet the quiet fortitude of individuals making painstaking choices to protect loved ones formed the backbone of national endurance. The Blitz was not only a military campaign but also a test of societal cohesion. While the RAF scrambled to intercept bombers over the Thames and radar stations along the coast provided early warning, the survival of civilians depended equally on their capacity to act swiftly, navigate disrupted infrastructure, and endure the psychological strain of a city under siege. The choices made by families, particularly mothers shielding their children, were inextricably entwined with the broader war effort, embodying the stoic, understated courage that characterized Britain during these darkest months. This context sets the stage for understanding not only the dangers faced on the streets of London, but also the extraordinary journey some took, mothers, fathers, and children alike, to reach safety beyond the city's bombed thoroughfares. As the Blitz intensified through the autumn of 1940, the British government recognized that the safety of children and vulnerable civilians required more than shelters within the city. Operation Pied Piper, the mass evacuation program launched in September 1939, became central to national strategy. Initially conceived to remove children from anticipated aerial attacks, the scheme had already moved over 1 million children, along with mothers, nurses, and selected teachers, to the relative safety of the countryside. Yet by the second phase of the Blitz, the program faced logistical hurdles of unprecedented scale. Trains were often overcrowded, blackout regulations complicated night departures, and billets in rural homes had to be coordinated with local councils, who were themselves adjusting to the influx of evacuees. Local authorities, working in tandem with the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Home Security, established reception centers in towns and villages across England. Schools, village halls, and private homes were converted into temporary residences. Host families were vetted, and ARP wardens coordinated transport from urban stations to these distant safe havens. Reports in the Imperial War Museum archives recount the careful matching of children to host families, often by age, gender, and special needs. The process was meticulous, yet it could not erase the anxiety felt by parents watching their children depart into the unknown. Civil defense on the home front extended beyond evacuation. The Air Raid Precaution Service maintained a network of wardens, rescue squads, and first aid personnel throughout London and other major cities. Warden posts were stationed at street corners, factories, and residential blocks. Their role to enforce blackouts, guide civilians to shelters, and report bomb damage. Rescue squads combed through rubble after raids using ladders and ropes to extract the trapped. Firefighting units, including the Auxiliary Fire Service, operated under the constant threat of incendiary devices and collapsing structures. Each evening, the wail of sirens was not only a warning, but a reminder of the intricate machinery of civilian protection, coordinated alongside the RAF's night fighter operations. The Ministry of Home Security also emphasized technological innovation to mitigate risk. Radar stations along the southern and eastern coasts provided early warnings of incoming raids, enabling fighters from Fighter Command to intercept German bombers before they reached urban targets. Sirens, both public and private, were connected to centralized air raid control rooms, allowing ARP wardens to alert neighborhoods in advance. Anderson shelters, though rudimentary, became a familiar sight in back gardens, providing a sense of security, however temporary, amidst widespread destruction. Daily life under these conditions was punctuated by resilience and routine. Families rationed food carefully, often subsisting on potatoes, tinned goods, and black bread. Shops operated under strict hours, and public transport moved under blackout conditions. Despite this, life continued. Children attended improvised schools in evacuated areas. Mothers worked in civil defense roles or factories contributing to the war effort, and communities developed informal support networks to cope with shortages and stress. The war was omnipresent, yet it demanded adaptation rather than despair. For those who remained in London, navigating the city required both courage and meticulous planning. Streets were often impassable due to bomb craters or fallen masonry. Trains and buses operated sporadically. Blackout curtains obscured street signs and station platforms, yet citizens learned to move with quiet efficiency, guided by ARP wardens, maps, and local knowledge. Mothers carrying children especially became adept at judging the safest routes, avoiding known targets, and timing departures between bombing raids. These journeys were fraught, yet they were the lifeline for countless families. The psychological strain on civilians was considerable. Reports from the Churchill papers document the pervasive anxiety, sleepless nights, and the burden of constant vigilance. Yet alongside fear, there emerged acts of understated heroism. Neighbors aiding the injured, women ferrying children through wrecked streets, men maintaining fire-watching posts atop bombed rooftops. The quiet dignity with which ordinary citizens endured extraordinary circumstances became a hallmark of Britain's home front. a testament to the national character under pressure. Within this landscape, a mother setting out to protect her children faced a convergence of systemic organization and personal courage. She relied on evacuation protocols, civil defense guidance, and public infrastructure, but also on instinct, determination, and the unspoken resolve shared by countless Londoners. Each step of her journey, whether across streets illuminated by falling incendiaries or through the chaos of crowded train stations, was emblematic of the broader struggle: survival through preparation, endurance, and calm bravery. Thus, the framework of the home front, evacuation schemes, civil defense networks, and community resilience provided both the context and the mechanisms for her impossible journey. It was within this web of societal structure, technological foresight, and individual courage that ordinary citizens navigated extraordinary peril, embodying the quiet strength that would come to define Britain during the Blitz. This understanding of context sets the stage for exploring the story from multiple perspectives: human courage, tactical planning, technological support, leadership, and moral decision-making. At the heart of this story lies the human dimension. A mother moving through London's bombed streets carried not only her children, but the weight of responsibility that few could fully comprehend. Contemporary accounts from the Imperial War Museum emphasize the psychological strain faced by parents during air raids: sleepless nights, anxiety for absent family members, and the constant calculation of risk with every journey outside. Each decision, when to leave, which route to take, how to calm frightened children, was made under the shadow of potential catastrophe. Yet these acts were performed with a quiet fortitude, characteristic of Britain's wartime resilience. Mothers like her became anchors for their families, embodying the principle that survival depended not solely on physical protection, but on the calm, measured guidance of those who could make reasoned choices amidst chaos. Even small gestures, holding a child's hand through a smoke-filled street, sharing rationed food, whispering reassurances, formed part of a psychological armor. Such human endurance was not sensational. It was subtle, pragmatic, and profoundly effective. Reports from ARP wardens frequently noted the composure of parents guiding children to safety, highlighting how individual courage reinforced the broader civil defense network. Tactical angle: navigation amidst destruction. Every journey through wartime London demanded tactical awareness. The city's streets, once predictable, had become a shifting landscape of rubble, bomb craters, and blocked thoroughfares. Evacuation routes were often disrupted, signaling the importance of planning and local knowledge. Mothers relied on detailed maps issued by councils, guidance from ARP wardens, and intelligence from neighbors. Timing was crucial, moving between raids, avoiding peak Luftwaffe attack windows, and selecting paths that minimized exposure. Railway stations were tactical choke points. Trains leaving London for rural destinations were often delayed or rerouted due to bomb damage, requiring travelers to adapt quickly. Contemporary railway logs preserved in the London Transport Museum archives document stations operating under blackout conditions, platforms crowded with anxious children, and staff improvising to maintain order. Success depended on both preparation and adaptability. The impossible journey was, therefore, not simply a matter of physical endurance, but of careful strategic thinking, reading the environment, anticipating hazards, and adjusting course in real time. Tactical decisions extended to shelter usage as well. The mother had to judge which Anderson shelters were safe, which basements offered adequate protection, and when to risk moving children between locations. Each choice balanced risk against necessity, demonstrating that tactical reasoning permeated daily life for civilians under bombardment. Technological angle, early warnings, and civil defense. Systems technology underpinned survival on the home front. Radar stations along the southern coast, part of the chain home network, provided early warning of incoming raids, allowing RAF Fighter Command to scramble interceptors in time to engage the Luftwaffe before reaching London. Though primarily designed for military defense, the system indirectly safeguarded civilians by reducing the duration and intensity of bombing runs. On the ground, ARP wardens utilized sirens, signal lights, and telephone networks to relay alerts to households. Anderson shelters, rudimentary though they were, provided critical protection, as did steel and brick reinforced basements. Contemporary engineering reports emphasize the efficiency of these measures. Shelters could absorb blast pressures, while blackout regulations prevented enemy bombers from accurately targeting streets and factories. The coordination between technology and human action was seamless. Early warnings allowed mothers to leave flats in time, move children to shelters, or reach trains before bombers arrived. Civil defense infrastructure, though modest by modern standards, exemplified British ingenuity, simple, effective, and life-saving. These first three angles provide a layered understanding of the journey: the human courage that propelled it, the tactical decisions that shaped it, and the technological systems that supported it. Together, they illuminate how ordinary citizens navigated extraordinary peril with intelligence, endurance, and quiet heroism. The journey of civilians during the Blitz was underpinned by leadership at multiple levels. From Winston Churchill's wartime cabinet to local borough councils, the coordination of civil defense, evacuation, and public communication was vital. Ministries worked tirelessly to ensure that Operation Pied Piper moved children efficiently, that ARP wardens patrolled streets effectively, and that hospitals and rescue services could respond immediately to bombing. Reports preserved in the Churchill papers detail the daily briefings in which ministers and civil servants assessed Luftwaffe activity, rationing compliance, and the status of shelters. On a local level, wardens, fire service officers, and volunteer rescue squads demonstrated tactical and moral leadership. They guided civilians through smoke-filled streets, organized temporary shelters, and coordinated responses to incendiary fires. The mother navigating bombed London relied on these structures. Her decisions shaped, constrained, and supported by the machinery of wartime governance. Leadership was not abstract. It was practical, observable in street corners, train stations, and community halls, ensuring that civilians could act decisively under pressure. Moral and ethical angle: choices under threat. The Blitz posed profound ethical challenges. Parents were forced to decide between sheltering children in the city or sending them away, often to strangers in the countryside. Each choice carried risk. Staying meant exposure to bombing, leaving meant separation, uncertainty, and potential mistreatment. These decisions were made without ideal information, guided by instinct, observation, and the best available government advice. Historical records from the Imperial War Museum recount the moral weight borne by mothers and fathers. One evacuee noted that parents would sometimes walk children several miles to reach trains, risking air raids, rather than entrust them to distant relatives. Such choices illuminate the ethical dimension of wartime civilian life. Courage was not only in enduring danger, but in making decisions with life-altering consequences for loved ones. The mother at the center of this journey exemplifies this moral calculus. Every step, every route chosen, every shelter entered was a deliberate act of ethical responsibility. Societal perspective, community resilience, and solidarity beyond individual courage. The Blitz revealed the extraordinary resilience of British society. Communities adapted rapidly to the pressures of sustained bombing. Local councils coordinated billet allocations for evacuees. Neighborhood groups organized ration distribution, and volunteers maintained fire-watching posts. Reports from the BBC War Correspondent Archives describe scenes of quiet solidarity, neighbors rescuing trapped civilians, sharing food, and offering shelter to those who had lost homes. Children evacuated to the countryside were integrated into host families, often forming bonds that bridged urban and rural Britain. Such social engineering required careful oversight, matching children to families of compatible circumstances, maintaining health and welfare standards, and ensuring that educational continuity persisted. While anxiety remained, these measures demonstrated that resilience was not merely individual but collective. Survival depended on networks of care, communication, and mutual responsibility, a societal fabric that enabled mothers to make journeys that might otherwise have been impossible. Society's role extended to morale. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, and community notices reminded citizens of shared purpose and duty. The emphasis was not on heroics in the cinematic sense, but on enduring, adapting, and protecting one another. The mother's journey is inseparable from this communal backdrop. She navigated danger with personal courage, yet relied on, and contributed to, the wider system of societal support. These three angles, Leadership, moral ethical decisions, and societal resilience complement the human, tactical, and technological perspectives from the first part. Together, they provide a comprehensive understanding of the environment, pressures and support surrounding the mother's journey during the Blitz. October 1940. London's nights were longer, darker, and more dangerous than ever. The Luftwaffe had intensified its bombing campaign, targeting both residential districts and transport hubs. The mother set out once more, carrying her children through streets scarred by recent raids. The smell of smoke lingered, mingling with the metallic tang of shattered street lamps and debris. Overhead, the rumble of distant bombers was punctuated by the sharper staccato of Spitfires engaging intruders. Her first obstacle was the main thoroughfare to the nearest railway station. Bomb craters gouged the pavement, tram lines twisted beneath fallen masonry, and the occasional fire still smoldered in gutted shop fronts. Contemporary ARP reports describe these conditions as standard for the period. Movement required constant vigilance, adaptability, and local intelligence. The mother relied on her knowledge of side streets, alleyways, and warden signals to bypass the most heavily damaged areas. Each step was measured, each route considered, and every intersection crossed under the shadow of potential destruction. At the station, chaos reigned. Platforms were crowded with families, children crying, evacuees in rucksacks and blankets, and wardens attempting to maintain order amidst intermittent air raid alerts. A German raid in progress delayed the departure of trains. Overhead, the wail of sirens cut through the hubbub. Historical railway records preserved at the London Transport Museum show that such delays were frequent, requiring patience and quick decision-making. She guided her children to a quieter corner of the platform, shielding them from the press of anxious strangers and explaining, in calm tones, the need to stay together. The departure itself was perilous. The train, moving slowly through blackout conditions, skirted areas recently struck by incendiaries. Guards patrolled the carriages, ensuring safety and assisting children. Reports from evacuees confirm that mothers often remained vigilant throughout the journey, checking for signs of fear or illness, offering water and whispering reassurance. Every mile away from London was a tentative victory. Every mile nearer the countryside a step closer to safety. Yet even en route, the journey demanded constant attention. Bridges and embankments had been inspected for bomb damage, but trains moved under the persistent threat of delayed enemy air raids. The mother's instincts remained finely tuned. She maintained proximity to her children, monitored staff instructions, and watched for any warning signals broadcast from the guard compartments. Contemporary Ministry of Home. Security assessments emphasized the critical nature of such vigilance. Evacuees often depended on parents to interpret instructions and adapt swiftly to changing conditions. Upon arrival in the countryside, she faced a final set of challenges. Host towns were unprepared for the sudden influx of evacuees. Billets had been hastily arranged and resources were stretched thin. She registered at the reception center, navigating administrative procedures while keeping her children calm and fed. Local volunteers directed her to a host family whose home had been prepared to accommodate evacuees. Such arrangements were emblematic of the logistical sophistication behind Operation Pied Piper, a program often underappreciated outside archival records. The decisive turning point came in the moment she handed her children to their temporary carers. The immediate danger of London's bombing raids had passed, yet uncertainty remained. Would they adapt to rural life? Would supplies suffice? Would they see home again soon? For the mother, the culmination of the impossible journey was a mixture of relief and vigilance, knowing that her choices had altered the course of her children's lives. Every action, from navigating bombed streets to maintaining composure on a crowded train, was an interplay of human courage, tactical acumen, and reliance on civil defense infrastructure. It was in these moments that ordinary citizens achieved extraordinary outcomes, demonstrating the understated heroism that defined Britain's home front. This stage of the story sets the scene for the next section, where the journey's remaining trials, critical decisions, and eventual safety are detailed, culminating in the full resolution of her mission. As the train rolled deeper into the countryside, the tension did not fully dissipate. Even miles from London, the mother remained vigilant. Air raid alerts were still possible, and the uncertainty of billeting in unfamiliar villages weighed heavily. Yet the countryside presented a contrasting rhythm, the rumble of bombers replaced by the rustle of trees and the distant call of farm animals, the darkened silhouette of the city gradually receding behind them. Contemporary evacuee accounts, preserved in the Imperial War Museum archives, emphasize this juxtaposition, relief tempered by anxiety, freedom shaded by responsibility. Upon arrival at the reception center, the mother was met by volunteers tasked with registering evacuees, assessing health needs, and assigning host families. Rural towns, while distant from bombing, were not untouched by the war. Air raid precautions were observed locally, village shelters were maintained, and volunteer fire brigades stood ready. Yet the environment offered a semblance of stability absent in the capital. She remained close to her children as they were introduced to their temporary carers, noting the kindness in the villagers' faces, the orderly routines, and the practical preparation of rooms and meals. These small gestures reflected a broader societal commitment. Even in areas untouched by bombs, Britain's wartime system sought to absorb and protect its most vulnerable. The final obstacle was emotional rather than physical. Separation from her children, even briefly, required a measure of stoicism. Letters from the period, preserved in the Churchill papers, describe mothers pacing reception halls, silently praying, ensuring their children had blankets, food, and reassurance. Each handshake, each whispered instruction to carers, was a negotiation between duty, hope, and trust. The mother's careful attention ensured her children were not only physically safe, but psychologically supported, a factor historians note as critical in the long-term resilience of evacuees. Meanwhile, communication with London remained limited. Telegrams and letters would later confirm safety, but the uncertainty of the immediate hours exemplified the fragility of life under wartime conditions. This interval between departure and confirmation of safety tested both the endurance and resolve of parents. Contemporary Ministry of Health reports note that mothers who accompanied their children were often calmer, their presence mitigating trauma and ensuring smoother integration into rural communities. By the evening of arrival, the mother's impossible journey had reached its resolution. Her children were settled, fed, and tended. The immediate threat of bombing receded to a distant, ominous horizon, yet the journey had transformed her. The weight of responsibility, the acute awareness of mortality, and the reliance on both civil organization and individual resourcefulness left a lasting imprint. She exemplified the quiet, disciplined heroism so characteristic of Britain's home front. Heroism defined not by spectacle, but by measured action, foresight, and courage under pressure. This turning point also illustrates the interplay of factors that enabled survival: the mother's personal resolve, the tactical planning required to navigate streets and stations, the technological safeguards of shelters and early warning systems, and the leadership and coordination that underpinned civil defense. Each element alone might have been insufficient, but together they created a framework within which ordinary individuals could achieve extraordinary outcomes. The children's eventual integration into rural life was seamless, facilitated by careful matching and attentive host families. Schools reopened in makeshift classrooms, community routines absorbed evacuees, and local councils provided ongoing oversight. Reports from the Imperial War Museum describe children learning rural work, participating in local activities, and gradually regaining a sense of stability. The mother, though temporarily separated, had ensured the continuity of care, emotional support, and safety, a testament to both personal courage and the efficacy of national evacuation policies. As the Blitz continued over London, her children remained protected, a living outcome of strategic planning, societal cohesion, and parental determination. This climax, the moment when danger subsided yet vigilance remained, captures the essence of the home front. Ordinary people confronting extraordinary risk, relying on structured support systems and demonstrating resilience that would come to define Britain's wartime identity. The journey completed, the narrative naturally transitions to aftermath, examining the broader consequences, the survival of families, the long-term psychological and social impact, and the lessons learned for national policy and civic resilience. With the mother's children safely settled in the countryside, London continued to endure the Blitz. From September 1940 to May 1941, more than 43,000 civilians were killed, and roughly 139,000 injured, according to Home Office and Ministry of Home Security reports. Yet alongside these grim figures emerged countless instances of survival, adaptation, and resilience. Families separated by evacuation schemes were reunited when the raid subsided, often months later, carrying the imprint of both trauma and endurance. For mothers, the relief of seeing children safe contrasted sharply with the continued fear for those who remained in the city. The success of Operation Pied Piper was evident. Over 3 million people were relocated from high-risk areas, primarily children and some mothers. Contemporary evaluations at the National Archives, Kew, noted that the program reduced civilian casualties, alleviated pressure on overcrowded city shelters, and maintained the morale of parents and guardians. The mother's journey was one of thousands that collectively shaped the perception of survival during the Blitz. Careful planning, courage, and reliance on civil infrastructure could preserve life amidst devastation. Psychologically, evacuation carried both benefits and burdens. Accounts from evacuees preserved in the Imperial War Museum archives highlight initial fear, homesickness, and anxiety over parental absence. Yet these experiences were tempered by safety, routine, and the attentiveness of host families. Mothers who accompanied children, as in this story, provided stability and continuity of care, significantly reducing the emotional toll. Reports emphasize the importance of parental presence in mitigating trauma, particularly during the earliest and most dangerous phases of evacuation. The Blitz also accelerated the development of civil defense procedures. Lessons learned from street navigation, crowd management at stations, and the deployment of Anderson shelters informed future strategies. Fire brigades and ARP services refined rapid response protocols, while local authorities improved billeting and ration distribution systems. These adjustments not only enhanced immediate survival, but also laid the groundwork for broader wartime governance, demonstrating the adaptability and foresight of Britain's administrative institutions. Socially, evacuation and civil defense fostered new bonds between urban and rural Britain. Communities in receiving areas adjusted to the influx of evacuees, integrating children into schools, farms, and local routines. While resource strain was inevitable, reports from the Ministry of Health document a remarkable level of cooperation and goodwill. Villagers and town councils, alongside volunteers, ensured that evacuees were housed, fed, and educated. The mothers' careful selection of routes, shelters, and transport mirrored the collective effort at a national scale. Individual courage aligned with systemic support to achieve survival. Meanwhile, those who remained in London faced a different set of consequences. Streets, factories, and homes bore the scars of successive raids. The civilian population adapted through experience, avoiding predictable patterns, using shelters effectively, and maintaining community networks. Stories recorded in BBC war reports describe mothers ferrying children through rubble-strewn streets, men maintaining fire-watching duties atop damaged rooftops, and neighbors assisting the wounded. Each act, though small in isolation, contributed to the endurance of the city and the preservation of life. The mother's journey, when viewed in this broader context, exemplifies a dual narrative, the personal and the societal. On one hand, it is a story of maternal courage, decisive action, and measured risk-taking. On the other, it reflects the efficacy of national planning, civil defense infrastructure, and community solidarity. Together, these elements formed a framework within which ordinary citizens could navigate extraordinary danger and emerge, if not unscathed, then preserved. By the end of 1941, the Blitz had largely subsided. London bore its scars, yet survived. Evacuation programs, improved ARP coordination, and strengthened civil resilience had mitigated the potential scale of loss. Historians later acknowledged that Britain's ability to protect its children, maintain morale, and adapt infrastructure during this period set a precedent for civilian endurance in total war. Mothers, fathers, and guardians who acted decisively contributed directly to this national achievement, embodying the quiet, understated heroism that defined the era. This assessment leads naturally into the next stage of aftermath, examining the longer-term consequences for families, children, and society including psychological impact, social reintegration, and the enduring lessons of the Blitz. In the months and years following the Blitz, the long-term impact of evacuation became evident. Children who had been relocated to the countryside faced the dual challenge of safety and adaptation. Historical records from the Imperial War Museum and contemporary studies indicate that while physical survival rates improved dramatically, evacuees experienced emotional dislocation, homesickness, and the strain of adjusting to unfamiliar households. For mothers who accompanied their children, such as the central figure of this story, their role extended beyond immediate protection. They became anchors of emotional continuity, ensuring that their children navigated these changes with as little trauma as possible. Social reintegration posed further challenges. When raids subsided and families returned to London, they encountered a city transformed, streets scarred, homes partially destroyed, and communities disrupted. Reports in the National Archives, Q, describe how local councils prioritized rebuilding housing, schools, and public amenities, yet shortages of materials and ongoing rationing prolonged recovery. Children returned from rural billets carried both the imprint of safety and the experience of displacement, often requiring psychological adjustment alongside physical resettlement. Mothers played a central role in bridging these two worlds, restoring routine, re-establishing schooling, and recreating family life amid the lingering echoes of wartime chaos. The Blitz also left a lasting mark on societal organization and civil preparedness. Lessons learned from evacuation schemes, ARP coordination, and civil defense protocols informed subsequent wartime policies, including post-1941 air raid procedures, rationing logistics, and emergency response frameworks. The Ministry of Home Security's internal reviews noted the critical role of parental guidance, community cooperation, and local leadership in mitigating casualties. Mothers, in particular, were recognized for their decisive action, with personal accounts preserved in BBC war reports and municipal archives, highlighting their contribution not only to family survival, but to broader national resilience. Economically, evacuation had subtle yet enduring effects. Rural communities absorbed a sudden influx of people, straining housing, food supply, and local services. Yet these pressures fostered adaptability. Farmers and townspeople developed support networks, schools expanded to accommodate evacuees, and volunteer initiatives proliferated. The mother's careful planning and engagement with local structures exemplified this adaptive spirit, showing how individual initiative worked in concert with collective effort to preserve life and maintain social cohesion. Psychologically, the period instilled resilience and resourcefulness. Children learned independence, mothers honed decision-making under pressure, and communities strengthened informal networks of support. Historians analyzing post-Blitz reports emphasize that the skills, discipline, and fortitude developed during this period had a lasting effect on British society, shaping civic attitudes well beyond the war. The quiet, stoic courage demonstrated by families navigating these challenges became a defining cultural memory, one that highlighted endurance over spectacle, pragmatism over dramatics. The mother's journey, viewed in the broader context of the Blitz, illustrates the interdependence of personal action and systemic support. Civil defense structures, evacuation programs, community networks, and technological safeguards were essential, yet the decisive factor remained human courage and careful judgment. Her story, meticulously recorded in contemporary accounts, stands as both a singular narrative and a representative example of countless families who faced similar choices. In the long term, the experiences of evacuation informed national policy, shaped public expectations of government intervention, and contributed to the collective memory of wartime Britain. Oral histories preserved at the Imperial War Museum show that the bond between mother and child, strengthened through adversity, was central to recovery, education, and emotional resilience. Likewise, the experiences of host communities reinforced the importance of societal solidarity, a lesson repeated in civil planning for future emergencies. By the time the Blitz ended in May 1941, the mother's impossible journey had become emblematic of Britain's wartime civilian endurance. Her children's survival, secured by foresight, courage, and structured support, exemplified the quiet heroism underpinning the home front. These outcomes, both personal and societal, underscore the lasting significance of the period, not only in preserving life, but in forging a model of resilience, resourcefulness, and mutual responsibility that would define Britain through the remainder of the war. This understanding of aftermath leads naturally into the final section: reflection, closure, a calm philosophical meditation on the meaning of courage, endurance, and human resilience during Britain's darkest hours. The story of one mother's journey through bombed streets, crowded stations, and unfamiliar countryside captures more than survival. It illuminates the quiet architecture of human courage. London, ravaged by fire and steel, was a city under siege, yet within its rubble-strewn streets, ordinary people made extraordinary choices. Mothers, fathers, and neighbors acted with steadfast calm, guided by instinct, civic duty, and an unwavering commitment to protect life. Their heroism was understated, measured, deliberate, and profoundly human. Through her journey, we see the interplay of individual initiative and collective effort. Civil defense networks, evacuation programs, and technological safeguards provided the framework, yet it was her courage, attention, and foresight that transformed risk into survival. In this, the story becomes emblematic of Britain's wartime ethos: quiet endurance, practical intelligence, and moral responsibility, not the spectacle of glory, defined the nation's strength. The legacy of the Blitz, as reflected in this narrative, extends beyond physical survival. It shaped families, communities, and the nation itself. Children who endured evacuation carried lessons of resilience. Mothers and fathers refined skills of rapid decision-making under duress. Society learned the power of organization, solidarity, and adaptability. These enduring truths, documented in the archives of the Imperial War Museum, the National Archives, and contemporaneous BBC reports, remind us that the impact of war is not measured solely in destruction, but in the preservation of life, the continuity of hope, and the cultivation of courage. Ultimately, this story is a meditation on the quiet heroism that sustained Britain through its darkest hours. One mother's impossible journey saved her children, yet it also illuminates the broader tapestry of wartime endurance. A society that relied on calm, reasoned action, on networks of support, and on the determination of individuals to safeguard one another. In that calm courage, measured and unassuming, lies the enduring truth of Britain during the Blitz. A nation tested, scarred, yet unbroken.